Hello, everyone. So I'm super excited about today's Chris's Corner. It's the final one for the year. And I'm super excited about my guest, who I'm going to introduce in a second. But everybody, what I always love for you to all to do is, first of all, announce that you're here. I always tell you guys, Chris's Corner is nothing without our audience. So everybody who interacts with us live, I absolutely appreciate your perspective, your questions, your comments, your support to other people. So first and foremost, definitely announce where you're at, where you're joining us from. And then also, questions throughout the conversation. Today's topic is New Year, New Me. New Year, New You as well. And what we're really just going to be discussing today is 2021 was a hard year. I think a lot of us mentally thought the pandemic was going to be over. We were going to get life back to normal and we would all be celebrating like it's the roaring 20s. And that didn't really happen. A lot of people's OCD and mental health are struggling. So what Tommy and I are going to have a conversation about is definitely discussing the idea of what are our OCD treatment New Year's resolutions? What do we want to change about our mental health? Where do we have to kind of get our headspace at to bring in the new year mentally strong? So that's going to be the conversation. We want to answer a lot of your questions, and from both a clinician perspective and a lived experience perspective. So like I said, announce where you're from, ask questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from where you're from. I know because of the time, there's a lot of people international, so we always love to hear that. So let me introduce myself. My name is Chris Trondsen. I'm the host of Chris's Corner. I'm an individual with obsessive compulsive disorder. I struggled and suffered for many years undiagnosed and was able to get treatment, and now in that management phase of my life. And I am now a therapist. I treat OCD at the Gateway Institute in Orange County, California. And I've loved kind of just doing that full circle. So before I announce my guest, I want to make a couple announcements that are important for our show. So the first announcement we always want to remind everyone is that this live stream is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. So for treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. We also want to create as safe a space as possible, so please be kind and respect everyone. With that, know that this broadcast is being live on various social media platforms and is being recorded, so please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions or leave comments. At the end of the day, we're all here to support each other. A couple more announcements before we get started. Don't forget to donate to help us reach our end-of-year fundraising goal. Your gift supports IOCDF programs designed to help people affected by OCD live better lives. So help us reach our year-end fundraising goal of $150,000 by December 31st. You can go to iocdf.org/end of year. Also, registration is open for the online OCD camp. I'm going to be a volunteer there, so hopefully I can support in that way. So created especially for youth between the ages of 6 and 17. The camp will feature 2 days of interactive sessions and activities for 3 age groups. In addition, the program will include sessions for parents, guardians, and opportunities for fun and socialization with other families. So learn more and register at iocdf.org/OCD camp. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest. So Tom, I have to program my brain to say Tom and not Tommy, but I hope Tommy, because it's going to slip out the whole time, doesn't insult you, just like if you called me Christopher. I think I'm just so used to it for so many years. But my guest today is Tommy Smalley. He is a good friend of mine. I actually met him at the OCD conference when I was running all the young adult content. He was I don't even think you're a young adult at the age. I think you're still like a teen in high school.
Yeah, I was young.
Yeah, young. You spoke at one of the breakout sessions I had. I really was inspired by your story, and you've been helping with young adult content ever since, speaking at the conferences. Now you are an IOCDF lead advocate, and you also are running the Anxiety and Athlete. So how you doing? How you feeling?
Good. I'm excited to be here. Excited to be on Chris's Corner.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you as my guest. So first of all, of course, hi to Nikki. She is out there in Dublin, Ireland. She says hi to both of us. Also, Eric from Houston, Texas. So thank you so much. And keep shouting out from where you're at and ask a lot of questions. Today is really going to be kind of like a Q&A, but we are definitely going to focus on, as the year concludes, kind of shifting your mental health mindset. So, Tommy, I'm going to start with you. I think when 2020 hit, it was a bad year. We were so excited about 2021. I know, at least here in California, during the summer, mask mandates were off, people were vaccinated. It felt like things were kind of opening up and normalized, and then it didn't. So maybe reflecting on the last year, I think one of the things that I've been trying to do with my clients and with other people is normalize struggle. So for you, when you look back to this past year, was there anything that was really hard for you, just mental health wise, whether it was OCD or any kind of mental health in general?
Yeah, I think it was all really. I mean, just a tough year in general, just because, like you said, I think we expect this to just flip, where everything was going to be back to normal. And obviously, I've never been through a pandemic in my life. This is the first time, and hopefully the last time I'll go through one of those. And as for you too. And I think we had no idea what to expect after the up and up was coming, and then had to realize quickly that it wasn't just going to be, okay, everything's back to normal. And so I feel like when I first off, when COVID happened, I was struggling with the isolation piece a lot. Not being able to go to the conference in person was a huge letdown to me, because being around that OCD community is so important to me. And not having seen you in person in over a year and a half, 2 years now, like it's crazy to think about that I haven't seen our people. And we've been doing this virtual thing for so long. But I think I had that mindset that I was looking forward to the next year, and okay, well, it's this year, and next year it's going to be all better. And then when that disappointment came, it started to, I think, almost made me a little bit more depressed, because you don't know when the next time actually is. But in the same respect, it helped me kind of learn how to live in the moment and force myself to live with uncertainty, as we know we need to do.
Absolutely. First of all, hi, Christian in South Carolina, Betsy in Philadelphia, and Karen in West Virginia. Once again, this show is all about just kind of like our new year of mental health, but please ask any general OCD questions. Both Tommy and I have OCD. We'll answer from a lived experience. Then I'm a clinician, so I'd love to answer your questions. So please pepper them throughout the chat, and we'll definitely bring them in. I don't know if you felt like this, Tommy. For me, I think one of the most difficult things is being a clinician. I've been fortunate to always be busy as a therapist. We are a large treatment center. We take some insurances, so we've been getting a lot of clients. But I started working a 6-day. I started working earlier and later during the pandemic, because so many people with OCD, even if they didn't have contamination around COVID, the isolation, the change, the negativity caused a lot of people's OCD to spike. And so I started working a lot. And I don't know if you felt this way, but what's been hard for me is like every day I'm working with people struggling. And, I think anybody in any kind of healthcare setting, or also advocacy, like we're giving so much to help our community. So for me, when there's this expectation, like, the pandemic's been great, I've learned how to cook, or I've lost a lot of weight during the pandemic because I've had time to work out, or, oh, I don't have a commute anymore and I spend more time with my kids. I haven't had that experience, because my OCD, my pandemic has been a lot of OCD, both advocacy and being a treatment provider. So how does somebody, if you experience that personally, or if not, how does somebody deal with that? Because I think there's this message like, take time, center, learn a new hobby. And sure, that's important. But I think all of us are struggling too much, or dealing with the community.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, obviously I'm not a clinician, so I don't have to also take on other people's OCD and help them learn how to live with that uncertainty and help them through treatment. But for me, it was like I just kept adding more to my plate, because I was trying to stay busy, but then was also kind of, when things kind of started going back a little bit more to normal towards the summer, I realized everybody was like, I picked up a skill, or I did this, I did that, like you said. And I felt like I had gone backwards in the pandemic, because I was struggling with my OCD. So, busy, a lot of that busy time was me, in treatment, trying not to relapse and trying to stay, because when the pandemic started, I was going to grad school, and I needed to be able to go to grad school once the pandemic was, able to let schools be schools. And so for me, I was really working on just making sure I was going to be okay to go live on my own and go to school still. And I think everybody's experience was a lot different than mine. And that kind of made me feel like I wasn't productive during that time. But I think it also showed me that everybody's productivity is a little bit different. And I was productive in the sense that I pushed past OCD again and made sure that I was ready to go for grad school. Whereas some people learn how to cook, some people learn how to knit, whatever it is. I was able to kind of pick up the skill of continuing with maintenance work for OCD.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like how you flipped it. By the way, I see your question, Renee, and Eric will jump to it in half a second. But, I'm glad that you say that, because for me, I would get frustrated when I'd hear all these people doing great. And meanwhile, I had gained some weight in the beginning of the pandemic, and I was not seeing my friends. And, I was always like doing OCD stuff, which is great. I mean, that's definitely my passion. And I wasn't learning how to cook and like build my own birdhouses. So it was like, it was just one of those things where I was like, okay, maybe my life isn't as productive as maybe, other people's, but this is like the best that I could do. So I think giving yourself self-compassion and grace. And I really like the work that Kim Quinlan has done. And that's what I've done for myself. It's like, I pictured in the future, if somebody asked me like, what were you doing during the pandemic, it's like, you and I have been so busy with our advocacy, and it's like giving back. And maybe we didn't focus on ourselves, and that's okay. We've been trying to help the community. So I don't want people to be judging themselves, because I've had a lot of clients in my office just feel like, wow, I've been a failure during the pandemic. I haven't made these drastic life changes like some people, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I totally agreed. I think if there's one thing I want for 2022 is for people to be more kind to themselves and more accepting of where they may feel they have fallen short, and stopping the comparison to others, because comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah, comparing yourself never works, because we aren't designed to compare ourselves better than others. We don't, walk by somebody who's without a home and like point at them and be like, "Oh, at least I have a house, I'm not homeless." Or we don't look
Right.
at somebody who's, like, I don't know, sick or in a wheelchair and say, "Oh, haha, at least I can
Right.
walk." I mean, what we constantly do is we see people that we deem better, and we compare as how we're
Correct.
less than, or
It's
what are
always
our
something
deficiencies.
negative that we're comparing to. You know what I mean? It's not. You're right. No, that's so well said.
Yeah, I mean, I run support groups, and I'll even have people privately after the group reach out and just say, wow, everybody seems to be doing so much better. And I always say, draw inspiration. If you see somebody that's doing something that you're extremely excited about, whether it's like working out, or they're quitting smoking, or their OCD treatment is going really well, let's champion that. Let's look at them and appreciate that. And then also for ourselves, strive to make some changes to get there. But let's not compare, because there's no win in that situation. We're always going to walk away feeling deficient, and then that's going to make us less likely to do anything. People always ask me, well, Chris, how come beating myself up and being hard on myself doesn't work in OCD treatment and quitting smoking and saving money and stuff? It's because our poor habits, we keep them around because they give us a level of comfort. So if I'm
Right.
walking around and I'm beating myself up because of the number on the scale, or I'm beating myself up because I'm doing compulsions, I'm going to get into a low mood, and that low mood is going to want me to do something quick fix to make me feel better. So I'm going to go straight to my poor habits that are designed to make me feel better in a short term, whether that's eating, whether that's smoking for someone, spending money, or in the case of OCD, doing compulsion. So the beating self
Right.
up just encourages those poor behaviors, and it usually comes from comparison. So if we can practice staying in our own lane and taking encouragement from other things we're inspired by, and talk to us the same way we would talk to a good friend, same kind of tone, same words, kindness, we find ourselves doing a lot better. I want to jump into the first question. It's at 12:09 a.m. It's from Renee Scott. And to sum up the question, Renee has been working with a therapist for a while now, doing really well in treatment, it looks like, except they are now at their kind of like their 10 is what I call it, like their hardest OCD trigger. So they're at the most difficult thing, and they're finding that they're really struggling with that hardest thing on their hierarchy. They're mentally ruminating, they are having panic attacks, it's lasting for days, and it just seems to fuel the OCD because the mental compulsion. So the question is it going to be helpful to see a different therapist? So I'll start with you, kind of from lived experience, and I can throw in my clinical
Yeah,
hat
definitely.
into the ring. So let's say you're working with a therapist, Tommy, and you're at that like last big challenge. You've done really well, and you're noticing that you're just not doing well. You're mentally ruminating, you're compulsing, your panic is lasting for days. Would you go to a different therapist, or what are some things that you might try that you could offer for Renee?
Yeah, I think the first thing to think about is, do you have a connection with the therapist? Are you connecting on a real level, and do you feel comfortable with the therapist? Because if you're not sharing everything with them, then you're not going to be able to face that anxiety as much as easily. I mean, it's never easy, but having somebody that completely knows what you're thinking and knows what you're dealing with is very, very comforting. Like when I went through intensive treatment, my therapist knew exactly what my obsession was, even if I felt it was embarrassing or taboo. She knew exactly what it was. So if you don't have that connection, then you're unable to find that level where you both can meet and kind of those compulsions to the curb and face those thoughts head on. The second thing is maybe start a little bit lower on the hierarchy. So for me, I would end up trying to tackle. I would do one. I was eager in the beginning. I would do one thing on our OCD hierarchy we made, and it was a compulsion that was hard, but it wasn't going to be the hardest one to kick. And after I did it, I felt extreme anxiety, but then it only lasted a few hours because it was a lower one on the totem pole. And then I would say, Amy, as my therapist, let's go to the next one. Let's go to the highest one. Let's do it. And she made the point to say, we gotta build up to that, right? If you just jump from the beginning right to the end, you're not building that level of discomfort, and you're jumping from 0 to 100, a low to an extreme. So maybe take a few steps back on that hierarchy and do some of the things on the hierarchy that you've done before, and do them more frequently. Try to throw in a little bit something extra that might make it a little bit more anxiety provoking, and then start building yourself up until you get to that level, because the top of the hierarchy and some of the really bad ones are going to be really uncomfortable. And there's been some days where my anxiety has lasted a couple days. There's been some things on the hierarchy that the OCD anxiety is excruciating for more than a day, but it will subside. I know that for a fact, right? It will subside if you keep punching the uncertainty, right? And I think having that connection with the therapist will really, really help. So I don't think necessarily going to a new therapist is gonna treat it any differently. I think it's kind of how you connect with the therapist. And obviously, Chris, you can weigh in on this from a clinical perspective, but I think just jumping from therapist to therapist might not necessarily change anything. It's more about how you're tackling the hierarchy and how you're doing your ERP.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add, Renee, is the only time I tell somebody to work with a different therapist is if your therapist genuinely feels like they've given you everything they have, and each session you're noticing that they're just frustrated or they're not coming up with new strategies or new ideas. So if I was working with you, first of all, one thing I always want to tell you is be honest with your therapist. We love honesty. So I would say next session is, unless you've already done this, is really let your therapist know I'm struggling. Like, I'm mentally compulsing because I'm so triggered from this exposure, and my anxiety and my panic is staying for days, to the point that I'm in so much anxiety, I'm not learning anything new. I'm not pushing through. I'm not learning about, yes, I can do this. I can overcome this distress tolerance. What I do with somebody is, if we're working on their 10, so this sounds like your biggest your biggest trigger ever, I create a mini hierarchy just for that major trigger. So I'll just use my life experience. So for me, my biggest trigger was driving someone, because I had an obsession that I was going to drive and get in a car accident and survive, but my passenger would die, and then for the rest of my life be guilty and never be able to make up for it. Having somebody in my room, like laying in my bed, touching my stuff because of contamination and fear of different diseases. So those were kind of like my biggest. I hadn't driven somebody or had somebody in my room in like 7 years at that point. So we created a mini hierarchy just for those two things. So instead of my therapist coming over and me driving my therapist the first day, it was, having somebody sit in my car seat or my passenger seat and us just talking for 20 minutes and then them getting out without even starting the car. And then it was like running the car and having them in the passenger seat.
Right.
Then it was just driving them around the block. Then it was driving them to the store and back. And then when my therapist came to my house, I drove my therapist around for half of the session. And same with the room, is having somebody talk to me while I stood in my room and they were standing outside, and then them leaning in the doorway, and then them stepping one foot in. And then eventually when my therapist came and I worked up with my family that ERP as homework, my therapist like jumped in my bed, was touching my stuff, like everything. So talk to your therapist about breaking it down. Because remember, the point of treatment, sure, we want the anxiety and the panic to go down, but we want to learn something. And by doing it slowly and having your brain not freak out, you can learn and take the information and teach yourself that what your brain once thought was dangerous wasn't. So my suggestion would be talking to them about breaking that big trigger into small, doable parts, even that one trigger.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think breaking it down and making like almost like it's a table of contents, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
breaking it down and listing it out and making steps towards getting there, I think is the best pattern, because it's just so much at once that I know I wouldn't be able to handle that. I think breaking it down, like you said, is really
Yeah, you cut out a little bit, Tom, but yeah, breaking it down, I agree, is helpful. The next question I want to get to is at 12:10. It's from Eric B, and it says, "This holidays have been difficult for me. My girlfriend's kids are sick with COVID, and they're quarantining, and meanwhile they're on their own. They're vaccinated, so they'll be fine. It's just really hard. Obviously, as this year ends out, it finishes up. I mean, a lot of people didn't have the Christmas, the holiday season that they had hoped. There's people that aren't going to have like the New Year's ringing in. I know they're going to do like the ball drop here in the United States, but it's not going to be the same. What's your advice for people to kind of look at these holidays and, like Eric, maybe they were alone or they didn't get to see all of their family, and not let that taint as we kind of move into the new year? Because we want people to have a better mental health for 2022. That's why we wanted to have this stream today, is to kind of kick it off. But what can people do so they can be in the right mindset and not let that boggle them down? Because I know for me, there was family I didn't get to see this holiday season. It was difficult. So how can people stay in that kind of mindset for 2022 and not feel like they're coming in stumbling because they're so disappointed with how their holiday season went?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's been tough for anybody, even without OCD, where nobody's really seeing everybody they want to see. Traveling is really shut down as much as it could be, and I think it's hard not to be doom and gloom and not have a bleak outlook on the future. But I think what the best part is that we can remember everything is temporary, right? As much as this has gone on for over 650 days now, right? 2 years, like it is temporary. Where we're gonna be in a year is going to be different than where we are now, and where we are going to be from two years from now is going to be different where we are a year before that. So just recognizing that situations are temporary, and there's good in every situation. We can see certain family members, so spend the most valuable time you can with them, and then look forward to the times where you can where you can see those family members that you didn't get to see in the holidays, and do the things that you didn't get to do in the holidays now. I think it's, obviously that's easier said than done. But for me, I know I've been kind of planning things for the summer so that I have something a little bit more to look forward to, because I know the summer, obviously, we're outside a lot more, and there's going to be hopefully more vaccines and more people vaccinated, and being outside obviously opens a lot of things up. So what I'm doing is trying to set up not an overwhelming amount of events or trips, but just a few things here and there where I'm saying, oh, I'm going to get to see some of my favorite people here. I'm going to get to go do something that I love here. And that's kind of how I've been looking forward, but not too forward enough where I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah, and Eric, I don't know if this helps, but I know for me, there was certain family I didn't get to see for the holidays. So one thing that I've been trying to do to make my mental health more positive, and what I want to do in 2022, and one of the cornerstones of OCD treatment, is flexibility. And so obviously, I would have loved to see all my family on Christmas Eve, but and Christmas. But on my dad's side, somebody in my family got sick. They ended up not having COVID. It was more sinuses and stuff. They got tested, but just to be safe, part of my family didn't meet up. And what I've planned on doing is, I know that my uncle likes the Super Bowl, so reaching out to set something up with that, or my cousins just got a new house, so going to their house and checking it out. So even if it's not Christmas in the traditional sense, it's going to be done, so I still can see them and still have that interaction. Right. So it's being flexible, and I think that's the biggest thing that I can always give everybody, is that's what we have to do in 2022. With OCD, our brains see it as one or the other, black or white. And part of the treatment that can help with any subtype is that flexibility. And when the OCD, when triggers throw you punches, it's being able to be flexible and to shift. And so instead of fixating, because in the past I would have fixated perfectionism OCD really hard. It's like, no, it's supposed to be this way and it's not this way anymore, and I have to fix it. And I'd be so fixated on trying to fix how I wanted it to be that I would have ruined Christmas Eve altogether. But instead it was like, okay, this is like sad. I'm sad I'm not going to see his family, but let's plan something soon. Let's all be safe about it, but let's plan something soon, and being flexible.
Yeah, no, that's such good advice. And I actually had a similar situation last week where I had the opportunity. I'm competing in a weightlifting event at the end of January. I'm strict training cycle, and I had the opportunity to go home a day earlier than I thought I was going to be able to go from work. But I wasn't going to be able to train that day if I went home. And knowing that I'm not going to see that I was sad, I'm not going to always be able to see my family right now, I took that extra day and was flexible in the fact that, okay, I'm not going to train today and it's going to bug my OCD, but I know I need to take this chance to go see my family, even if it's throwing off my routine, because these are the moments that like you can't take for granted.
Absolutely. And that's flexibility. And that's the thing, is like, I know with OCD for you, there's a lot of stuff with perfectionism, with working out and things like that. So you made the choice to live with your values, and you found that it was more important to see your family than to give into that need to be perfect, to work out, to train. And because of that, I'm sure it was a difficult decision, but you lived in your values. So ultimately, when you made that choice, things opened up for you and you felt better about it. So that's why I always tell my clients, and that's kind of some ACT principles, is live in your values. If your choices are made by fear, they will always be something that exacerbates the OCD, and you'll regret it. Oh, so here's a big question that we get a lot. So it's at 1211 from Karen, and it says, is there ever a cure for OCD? I've had it for most of my life. I'm also a hoarder, but it got worse when I had my kids. So Karen, I first want to normalize your experience with it getting worse when you had your kids. We see obviously the average age when people start to experience major OCD symptoms is that puberty age of 8 to 13. The second largest time we see it is 18 to 21. Puberty ends, hormones change, people move away, there's a lot of change. But that's why we talk a lot at the IOCDF about perinatal OCD, is because for a lot of women that have children, their hormones make drastic changes. They feel responsible for life. Their OCD gets a lot worse. So first of all, I want to normalize that. I'm not, sadly, I'm not surprised that it got worse when you had kids. That's a normalcy. I know Liz McInville does a lot of stuff on perinatal OCD. We have a perinatal OCD task force. Definitely go to the website and check that out. But I know for me, I work with a lot of, new moms whose OCD gets worse. And even dads, the added responsibility of taking care of a kid. Sometimes their OCD subtypes shift or it gets worse. But how have you, I'll let you answer this question first, Tommy, and then how have you kind of coped with your answer? Because it's not, yes, there's a cure, take this pill kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think first was, it's a loaded question. It is a loaded question. And it's disappointing to me that I can't say, oh, there is a pill, let me refer you to it, and there's a cure, because there isn't. And, it is something chronic. But the best answer, and an answer that I learned from you and from Liz and from Ethan, was that, when I was younger and before I was an advocate, when going to conferences and watching you guys speak, was that there's no cure, but there is a way to make life so purposeful and worth living. And that's the biggest thing that I always have in the back of my head, while I'm still doing treatment and still, pushing past anxiety, is that no, I won't be cured, but I can get my life to a point where OCD doesn't bog me down and doesn't debilitate me, and I'm able to go do everything I love and be with the people I love and live a life that has so much purpose and meaning. And so to me, that's a cure in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question clinically, Karen, unfortunately, there isn't a cure. When we look at a cure is something where we can literally take out the problem. So, a cure for OCD would be like a pill or would be a certain treatment where your OCD just vanishes. You have no experiences, etc. I look at my life. I mean, I have people around me all the time. What's great about virtual is you guys can, you all can only see what I show you. But if I was to move, my computer, I mean, when I struggled with OCD, everything had its place. It was neat. It was a lot of like also magical thinking. Things needed to be in its place. It's not. I mean, my life looks 1,000% different. I mean, my family always talks to me about it. They're just like, wow, like, at Christmas, I was one of the first people there where, when my OCD was bad because of rituals, I would show up 8 hours late. So the good news, Karen, is there is great treatment. I always tell people that if you're going to have a disorder, the one good thing about having OCD is we have a gold standard treatment. And what gold standard means is all of the people that have done research have concluded this treatment is the best treatment. And when I was in grad school and when I was in undergrad and learning about the DSM, which basically is this big diagnostic statistical manual of all the different mental illnesses that we've identified, and there would be a bunch in there where there's no treatment. And I would be sitting in class like, what do you mean there's no treatment? Or, treatment is really harsh medical interventions that people, have a lot of side effects, or it's all medication. And I just kept thinking like, I am so not happy that I have OCD, but at least OCD has treatment, whereas some of these disorders, they're still trying to figure out treatment. Or something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. I mean, most of that is going to be medication management and not something behavioral you can do. So to answer your question, Karen, even though we don't have a cure, what we do have is we have behavioral therapy. It's a type of therapy known as exposure and response prevention. We've noticed that pairing some mindfulness or some acceptance and commitment therapy can help reframe how you do treatment and have you live in those values. And then there's medications, SSRIs, SNRIs. So seeing a psychiatrist, I see that there's a find help option. You can find both a treatment provider and a psychiatrist that know OCD. So I know in my own case, if everybody on this stream would have met me when I was at my worst, and now knowing me from the streams, you'd think, wow, this can't be the same person. I mean, I was housebound for 3 years, barely left my house except to buy necessities. I would spend days and weeks alone in my house. I would, where I lived, barely interacting with anybody. I stopped talking to family. I dropped out of school. I was doing 16 hours of rituals. So where I'm at today, it's like we all have intrusive thoughts, even people without OCD. The difference is if I do get a thought or a feeling, it's so minor, it barely registers, and I live my life as normal. So even though I can't say cure, your life can be 99.999% better. And I joke all the time, living in Southern California, traffic and taxes bothers me way more than OCD does on a daily basis. So you can absolutely get better. The IOCDF can offer that support. Definitely want to say hi to Pauline. A really nice comment from you. Thank you so much. We have Nick from Toronto. We have Pari, who is right here in Irvine. I want to take the next, and Christiana, you're welcome for us doing this. Beth at 1223 says, this is my problem. The virus has caused me to believe things are contaminated. Never had contamination OCD before. I stay in and never go anyone or let anyone over. March will be 2 years. So that was Beth at 1223. So Tom, I want to kind of ask you, I know for a lot of my clients, they had never had contamination OCD or any fears. And then the pandemic had them, and they're wiping down groceries, they're washing their hands. I think what's also difficult is at the beginning of this, we didn't know what this was. And so people were like wiping down groceries. I remember watching, I never did it. You know why? Because having such severe contamination at one point in my life, I used to do that. I used to wipe down all of my groceries. I used to sanitize everything. And I just remember how hard that was. And I remember thinking when it was coming out, you had to do that. I was like, I can't. I'm like, I know this is crazy. Even if this will save my life, like I can't do it. It's so much mental trauma and strain from years of doing it. I can't.
Absolutely.
But I know because a lot of information came out in the beginning, like don't have people over, wipe things down.
Yeah.
What's hard with OCD is I think the average person now knows, okay, the way that I'm going to get this virus is if I'm not vaccinated and if I'm in close contact, especially indoors with low airflow, because it's a respiratory virus. Sure, wash hands because we touch our eyes, nose, and mouth, but the likelihood that we're going to get it because somebody touched our microwave and we touch it 2 days later, that's not how people are getting it. But I have so many clients, they know that, but the OCD doesn't register. It's like, nope, at one point, this is what we thought. I'm going to stick with it forever. So how, when somebody gets a new subtype like Beth, how can they handle it so that they don't completely crumble and now have this difficult new kind of trigger?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from experience as well. From in the start of the pandemic, I went home because I was in college at the time, and feels like 5 years ago, but it was actually not that long ago. And I was living at home, and I never had actual contamination issues with or that subtype with my OCD growing up and going through it. And I didn't necessarily have contamination issues about the virus when I was living at home through the pandemic. But what I took on was the fact that I was going to be asymptomatic and pass it to my parents and end up giving it to them, which they would then die. And that was my OCD thought the whole pandemic. And it still is here and there. Now that they're boosted and vaccinated, I have a little reassurance that, they didn't give me themselves, but it's a little bit of reassurance. But I think the biggest thing to help you not crumble is to really attack it just like you would any other subtype and any other thing that comes up with ERP, with medication. And I know we preach this so often. And so, every session I'm always preaching, every time online, I'm always preaching ERP. But that really is the way to halt OCD and push that anxiety away and learn how to cope with new subtypes. And going to your therapist, one thing that I worked on with Amy was learning how to tackle new thoughts as they come up, because my thoughts from 5 years ago that I have, my obsessions from 5 years ago are way different than they are now. And so they change over time because they just keep attacking what you love, right? Everything that matters to you. So knowing that things matter to you, learning how to, okay, I have a checklist of I'm going to do this, this, and this when a new thought comes and when a new compulsion comes. Being prepared is the best way to combat new subtypes, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Beth, what I want to offer you this is I know how hard it is. I mean, for me, I didn't have any kind of harm or sexual intrusive thoughts. My whole OCD experience, I didn't even know that was OCD. And towards the end of my treatment, when we thought we were going to end, that hit me. And suddenly I had thoughts of killing my grandma, killing my sister, and like snapping and doing that. I had thoughts of like having like, following a stranger out of Target and, sex and all this stuff. And I literally thought I got mad. And I think that's what's so hard when we get a new subtype is we've gotten comfortable and we've started to be able to identify what our actual OCD subtype is. And then OCD switches it up and it's like, oh my God, what is this? And then we give into compulsion so much that now we've created a new normal for ourselves. And that's what you've done. And, all what I empower all my clients to do is just what I was saying earlier to Renee. Our first question is break it down. So maybe you aren't able to, have people over or go anywhere, but start small, like walking. I don't know if you have a home or apartment, but walk in your home track or your apartment complex. Go outside at a time when you know the likelihood anyone will be out is pretty minimal. Wear your mask, like stay distance from people and walk around the block and just start there. Just get comfortable with being out doing that. And then once that becomes comfortable, try going at a different time when maybe there might be one or two people that walk by, or practice like sitting in your front, yard and watering your grass or just something, but start small. Tom, I can relate to what you're saying is my OCD was never about the fear of harming others, but going to my grandma's, I was so nervous to see her because my grandma's 85, and giving
Mhm.
her the virus and being asymptomatic. And, you know, there's some reality to that. But just like you said, it was like once my grandma was vaccinated and boosted, it's the same that I would say to you, to Beth. It's like I finally had to say, I've done everything I can. My grandma's done everything I can. She's a grown adult. She can take care of her own health. I'm going to make smart choices, and that's the best we can do. And so,
Right.
Beth, what I'll leave you with too is, the isolation and being by yourself and not seeing other people and not getting out of your house. That's causing a whole different level of difficulty in your life. And so we got to weigh the consequences of that. And you may be safe from the virus, but you're doing damage to your mental health. And I'm glad you're here at this live stream and that we can provide a community. Think about breaking it down to really big baby steps, even if it's walking, going on your front porch and going back inside. Anything to start with. Whenever we talk to people that have gotten better, people can remember that first little thing they started with. And that's what we encourage you to do. Christiana, you asked, how can you contact me not on the live event? You can either email the IOCDF. Their email is info@iocdf.org, and you just put in the headline, like for Chris's Corner, and they are really good at forwarding it to me, and I'm good at getting back to people. Or on Facebook and social media, it's just my name, Chris Trondsen. So you could find me and then message me on Facebook or social media. The next question comes at 12:24. It's from Isabella. How does one who struggles with scrupulosity do ERP for something that isn't tangible? So I'll start with this from a clinical standpoint, and then Tommy, maybe you could throw in kind of any of your experience. So when we have somebody that has OCD, like let's say with scrupulosity, the fear is that you might go to hell, or let's say somebody is afraid of, where do they go after they pass, things like that, where you can't go, like physically go to the store and touch something or drive. That's what in the 1970s, a woman named Edna Foa recognized that the OCD treatment out there only really worked for people with things that were tangible. And she created what we call imaginal exposure. So most people know them as like worry scripts or narratives. And we also work on what mental compulsions we're doing and stop those mental compulsions. So here's an example for you, Isabella. Let's say my fear is scrupulosity, and I have a fear that I'm going to do something that's going to anger God and I'm going to go to hell. And so I find myself throughout the day questioning everything that I do. Was that good? Do I think that was bad? Do I think God would be upset? And let's say I even kind of apologize to God under my breath. And then I think about treatment. It's like, well, how am I going to face that? Well, first of all, response prevention is always important. So if you're doing something like over praying or, any kind of avoidance. Let's say you aren't going to church because you're afraid you're going to have a bad thought at church. Or let's say you're over being extra nice and saying yes to everyone because you're super afraid of getting anybody angry or hurt because you think that that's going to anger God. That's where you want to do the response prevention, no avoidances, and prevent yourself from praying and things like that. We also want to challenge mental compulsion. So let's say you're finding yourself throughout the day ruminating and kind of evaluating all the things that you're doing because you're trying to mentally check if you did something to anger God. That's where we practice acceptance instead. We deny our ability to spend all day in our head, not being mindful and focusing out, but being in our head. We're going to say, no, OCD, this is just as much of a compulsion as something physical. I'm going to accept the unknown. I'm not going to mentally check my day, and I'm going to focus on the future and focus outward and be present, denying OCD that rumination. And then finally, those narratives or worry scripts are amazing. You can write out your worst case scenario, worst fear in that first person present tense, and then read that. And by reading that and having trigger words and having sentences and descriptions that trigger you, writing out that you've done something horrible and God's upset, by reading that, it's going to practice getting your anxiety up, and you're going to really stick with that response prevention. And that's going to teach your brain not to jump in with compulsions if you're triggered. Was there anything for you, Tommy, that was something you couldn't tangibly touch, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I dealt with scrupulosity when I was in high school. I was going to confession. I was raised Roman Catholic, and now I belong to a congregational church, so I switched, denominations. But as a Christian, that was something hard for me to grasp, and there was always this fear of going to hell, and that anytime I felt like I did something wrong, I was running to church and going to confession. And the one thing I did was join a support group for Scrupulosity. I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but there's a lot of good resources, and I'm going to plug KDO down here. Obviously, we didn't have this resource when I was going through it, but now we do, and it's the most phenomenal community, the faith-based community, and she's starting, her initiative with OCD and faith. Katie O'Dunn does a really great job bringing everybody together and touching on subjects that a lot of people are struggling with more than you think. And for me, knowing that other people were afraid of going to hell made me a lot more able to confront that fear and confront that anxiety, because there were other people that I know were in it with me, because it's not tangible, because I couldn't feel it or see it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that advice. And Isabella, I think that's a great advice. Definitely a support group. Real quick shout out to Bettina. They listened to my OCD podcast, OCD Stories with Stuart Ralph, and sent me a message. I'll definitely check that out. Betsy at 1230 asks, any suggestions to not default in compulsing? So Tommy, as we know, a big part of the treatment is response prevention. So not jumping to that compulsion. How, when you're triggered or you deliberately trigger yourself in treatment, do you refrain personally from not jumping to compulsion because it's so tempting?
At first it was, my thing was, okay, I would ask, what would Amy do? My therapist. That was my thought in my head, because that's what she was like. Because the biggest trouble for me was I would leave therapy and I would resist all the compulsions when she was next to me, but then I would go home and it was 10 times harder to not compulse and to not engage in those ritualistic behaviors. So for me, it was accepting the thought and then taking a deep breath and making it into an exposure on my own, and learning and practicing that over and over again to learn how to deal with it without having to have Amy right next to me. So a lot of what I did was mindfulness of, and it's not, I'm not one to meditate. I'm not one to sit there and say, let's have a blank mind. I can't do that. But what I could do was accept the thought and give it that mindfulness of, it's a thought, and I'm going to fully immerse myself in that anxiety of combating that thought, because then it gave it the label of, that's an OCD thought. And I was able to combat that with ERP on my own.
Yeah, no, somebody definitely said in the comments that really understanding and learning about OCD was definitely helpful. And I think that that's something that's so important too, is always knowing the disorder and understanding what it comes from. So what helped me is learning why I'm doing my compulsions. My compulsions were something happened that disrupted my feelings of safety. So I wanted to do a physical or mental compulsion to try to get me to feel back to neutral and to feel safe. But once I understood that OCD wasn't really keeping me safe, it was just keeping me busy and stressed and worse. And so if I was to let go of the compulsion long term, I would start to feel better. And so I used to run gyms for a gym. And so I always use that to tell my clients, it's like we were promised by trainers and the fitness industry that if you work out, it's going to suck in the beginning, but you're going to start getting into a groove and feel great. And I know that's true. So a lot of times when we know something's going to have a payoff, we are more likely to engage in it. And so that really helped me, is learning like, okay, these compulsions are going to give me short relief, but just reinforce something's wrong. If I let go of the compulsions and don't do it, sure, it's not going to feel great. It's going to suck for a little bit, but eventually it's going to feel better. And if both things are going to suck, if giving into compulsions and not giving in both suck, at least there's a long-term payoff with not giving in. The other big advice I'd give you is delay. This is for everybody. Delay your compulsions. So what I used to do is if I touched something and my hands felt dirty, I'd say, okay, in 30 minutes, I can wash my hands. I'm going to give you that OCD. I'm going to cave, but I'm going to wait 30 minutes. And a lot of times, 30 minutes later, I either didn't want to wash my hands, I did it quicker, or the urge wasn't as strong. So that can help. Pari asks at 1237, would you please speak about hoarding and the best way to unclutter, especially papers? So I actually have a grandfather who passed, but he was a hoarder to the point that his house was so slammed with stuff you couldn't go into most of the rooms, and it was a lot of papers. And Pari at 1237 asks about how to declutter, especially papers. So there's a couple things you can do, Pari. First and foremost is I have a rule with my clients that hoard. It's if you bring in an item into your house, 3 items have to go of similar value. So let's say you are bringing in new papers. A lot of times it can be junk mail or it can be receipts. You have to then, before you can put those receipts down, you have to turn around and grab 3 receipts, shred them, get rid of them, trash them. The other thing I have people do is find a section of the home and make piles. Have that, keep pile, that maybe pile, and that donate or trash pile. And everything for donate trash, get rid of it right then. The things that are on the maybe pile, maybe you cut 50% and give away the other half. And the stuff that you keep, put it away. If you haven't used something in 6 months, get rid of it. But the biggest thing is what I find for a lot of my clients that hoard is if they know that they're going to give their stuff away to something that's important of value. So let's say I've worked with kids that hoard items, and if they know that their clothes or their toys are going to go to somebody less fortunate, they're more willing to let that go. So think about that. As for papers, most of the time people keep papers because of one or two reasons. Either it gives them a positive or good feeling because it reminds them of an event. So I remind people that that event's in your head. The paper's not going to help. And maybe you have 50 papers that remind you of that one event. Get rid of the 49 and keep that one. Or sometimes people keep it because they're afraid that they're going to need it in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people, yes, we are advised to keep papers for 7 years for our taxes. So that you can do and have it in a neat folder and stored somewhere. But other than that, keep a paper for 6 months. If you don't need it, get rid of it and slowly kind of learn to get rid of stuff. So remind yourself that it's a more value to have space, to have family over, to have friends over, and to not rely on those issues. I don't know, have you had any experience with hoarding, or
I
that's not
haven't.
something you've
I
dealt?
haven't. I think I think your answer was very, especially clinically, was spot on. And honestly, I do have a tendency to keep papers for a long time, so I might start using that advice too.
Yeah, no, and those are just some quick things, but there's resources as well.
Definitely.
Phyllis at 1247 asked about BDD support groups. Phyllis, I know that I think they have to be a member of his clinic, but I know Ari Winograd ran a really successful BDD support group. I was one of the first members, and I believe he's still having that. I spoke at that a couple years ago. I would definitely go to the IOCDF search engine. I run support groups. Unfortunately, I haven't ran a specific BDD support group because I find that individuals with BDD aren't consistent in support groups because a lot of times they don't feel attractive. They don't want to be seen by people. So I have a mix of people with BDD in my OCD support group. And luckily, because there's some similarities, people definitely help out. But I know there's great clinicians that treat BDD. Fugan comes to mind, or Sabine Wilhelm and Catherine Phillips and Scott Granite. So seeing if any of them run support groups. But I know the BDD SIG is supposed to meet soon, and we have the BDD page. So we got to figure out a way to do a support group kind of toggle just for BDD. At Jane at 1248 asks, how to deal with perfection. Anything I do has to be done perfectly. So if I start a diet, I need to read everything and learn everything in the subject and never start anything. Tommy, is that something you dealt with, and how did you deal with that perfectionism? And
Yeah,
hi, Val.
that's something I still deal with today, and something that we've brought up with anxiety and athletes a ton, and something that we're working on more resources for athletes with it, because with athletics and with sports, there's a lot of perfectionism, and it's often preached like, oh, why didn't you put in the extra work? But to what extent is that extra work chasing perfectionism and turning into OCD behaviors, or is it hard work that's necessary? And that's what we've been working on is deciphering the two. And what we've come to the conclusion is there's a pursuit of perfection and a pursuit of excellence. And this is how I've dealt with perfectionism since then. Is pursuit of perfectionism isn't actually helping us, and isn't getting us to our final destination of where we want to be and where our goals are. Pursuit of excellence knows that there's times we're going to come up short, and knows that there's hard work to be put in, but it also knows the need for recovery and the need for and I'm using it in a training sense here, but the need for rest and being kind to yourself. So kind of deciphering the two and labeling the two has helped me deal with perfectionism. And I think also one thing that, I'm the head strength coach at a private training facility, and in the beginning, it's a brand new facility, so I wanted to keep it perfectly clean all the time. But obviously, I can't be here 18 hours a day, and sometimes things are going to be left out. And so one thing that I'll give an example of the exposure I've been doing is every night before I leave for work, I leave something out on the ground, and I have to take a picture of it and send it to my therapist and say, wow, I have the messiest weight room in the Northeast. And every day it gets a little bit easier to deal with that mess, because I know that mess that I'm creating is actually is pushing me further towards that pursuit of excellence than my pursuit of perfectionism.
Yeah, what I want to throw out there, I mean, perfectionism was one of my worst OCDs, and it's something that I deal with now. It's not to an OCD level, but at OCD Southern California, we're one of the affiliates. We throw a conference every year. Our last conference, we had 1,187 people totally either be there live or log in. And I'd speak at the IOCDF's conferences and stuff. And I'm such a perfectionist. I want things to go well. And what I've done for myself is known when that threshold is being passed, when it's no longer fun, when it's no longer I'm learning something, when I'm no longer enjoying that experience, and now it's become all work and heavy and uncomfortable and anxiety. I know I've gone too far and I have to pull it back. And what I've done is I've allotted myself to not get 99 and 100% anymore in everything that I do. It's like, I'm going to aim for a 92. So I'm going to allot some things to go wrong. So when we do have the conference and certain things fall through, it's like, you know what? I allotted for that. I can just let it go. I want to write a article for the IOCDF. I've always thought about it, and I want to title it "Getting a B Saved My Life." Because when I was in school, when I went back to school after my treatment, I still was dealing with perfectionism, and I killed myself to get all A's, and I got a B in a class, which I rightfully deserved. And it finally let me let go. And the rest of my undergrad and my grad school program, I still got all A's in grad school, but it was so fun and enjoyable and easy, because once I had that B, I no longer had to be perfect. So what I would really, really work on, and this kind of jumps into what Lovelana asked about the all or nothing ways, is I realized that when I strive for perfection, if I didn't hit it, I would jump straight to just giving up. I would drop a class. I wouldn't shower that day. I would quit something, and that wasn't healthy. So what I learned how to do is really work on doing good, striving to be as good as I can. And sometimes second best is going to be all right, or I'm going to do excellent, or I'm going to put in effort, or I'm going to lot for things not be perfect. Some tangible exposures, I'd perfectionism around, definitely I'd perfectionism around like buying a new item and not wanting it to be damaged. So if I bought like a new notebook, I would pull out a piece of paper and make a mark on it. Or I would, take like a little bit of a drink and spill it on the back of my car and just leave it there for a couple days, like just deliberately mess something up. Because once I did that, I found that my anxiety about being perfect was gone. And then I could be great and excellent and not have to be perfect. Shout out to Ken Salama, is in the Philippines. To take us out, I know we only have a minute. And everybody, please feel free to do this in the comments. So I want us to end on a positive note. What are mental health / OCD kind of resolutions for 2022? So Tommy and I are going to say ours, but in the comments, if you'd like to, what are your 2022 resolutions for your mental health? What do you want in 2 or 3 months to still be striving for, whether it's for OCD treatment or for your general mental health? So definitely do it in the comments. I'll shout out a couple if we get some. But Tommy, for you, 2022, what are your OCD kind of New Year's resolutions for OCD and treatment and mental health?
Yeah, I think, from my personal standpoint and my OCD journey, I think mine is relating to advocacy and not feeling the pressure to be perfect because I'm a lead advocate, and recognizing that showing my transparency and what I struggle with actually provides more value with advocacy and helps us connect with others so much more clearly. So showing that transparency and making sure that, like Christiana just said, to give myself grace, right? Know that just because I'm an advocate doesn't mean I'm a poster child for recovery, right? It means that I'm in recovery and I'm able to speak for people that haven't been able to speak yet, and to provide hope for people.
Beautiful and well said. We have Eric who's going to take time out to meditate or do something meditative. You shouted out Christiana's giving yourself grace is amazing. Kevin, welcome for joining us. To minimize compulsive rumination and focus on recovery as living and loving life. I love that. Shout out to LinkedIn. Thank you everybody else for your New Year's resolutions. I think my big one is self-care. I always, because living with this hellish disorder, I want to save everybody. If I'm being honest, that's why I advocate. That's why I'm a therapist. Right. I'm like, and after my suicide attempt too, it's just like, I want nobody to ever be suicidal, nobody to have OCD. And I recognize that I can't do that alone. That's why I love the IOCDF, the advocacy team that we have. So I need to sometimes realize, like, just like our phones need to be charged in, I need to be charged in so that I can be strong for everybody else. So Liz and I talk about that a lot. We need to take time for ourselves.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
I like that. And she had a kid, so she was forced to relax a little bit. Ethan was forced to relax a little bit because he has a girlfriend. You're forced to relax because you have everything with your career. I need to force myself. We have a couple other good ones I want to shout out. We have Bettina who says, I want to understand more and get better. Yes, please get more information on OCD. Val, we love Val, one of our good friends. She shouted out, you keep advocating, expanding your outreach, Val. You have such a great voice that the world needs to hear. Jane is to move out from parents. They trigger OCD and can't leave. So definitely, like, that was hard for me to move out. That's awesome. Betsy says not to compulse and to learn more about OCD. So these are all great New Year's resolutions. Definitely stick by them and work hard to getting better. I want a couple reminders before I thank my guest. Obviously, if you want to learn more about what upcoming live streams we have, go to iocdf.org/peace of mind. That is definitely a great place to go. You could submit questions and topics and themes. New Era on YouTube, unfortunately, we got to check out, but you have a great question about fighting contamination. We did talk about it earlier in the stream, so this will be up on the IOCDF's YouTube channel and Facebook. Watch the beginning. We had a question on that. Or go to iocdf.org, peace of mind, and we'll answer that question in a future live stream. Definitely make sure to go to iocdf.org for any resources, like and subscribe. And lastly, myself, Tommy, along with Val, who's in the comments, with Ethan, Katie, and Liz McInville, all of us, we are going to be back next Tuesday, which is January 4th, for the first live stream of the year, I believe. It's going to be in the evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we're going to be talking about the 2022 live streams and the advocacy program doing that. So please join us. That's next Tuesday, January 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, where we're going to have all the lead advocates. We're going to be talking about the live stream schedule for 2022. I want to thank you, Tommy, for joining me. You were the perfect guest to have today. Thank you for helping to answer all the questions, your positivity, and your New Year's resolution. And we will be kicking OCD's butt in 2022 and having positive mental health. And thank you for joining me on that.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It's always a privilege.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Well, everybody have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your year. And like I said, we're here to support you in the new year at the IOCDF. Thank you so much for joining Chris's Corner. It's been a pleasure. Have a great rest of your day.